So I think like if you hear 100 hours, you're like, that seems like a lot.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. This is the Seven Sage Podcast. I'm Zishan, that's Henry, that's Nicole. Today, we're talking about studying for the LSAT over the summer. Maybe you're a junior in college, a senior in college, a few years out of college, maybe a freshman in high school. Maybe you shouldn't be studying for the LSAT if you're that young, but you find yourself...
I was about to say.
You find yourself in a season of life like summer where maybe the responsibilities of day-to-day life have shifted a little bit. Maybe you've got some time off. Maybe you're doing an internship. Maybe you're taking some summer classes, whatever. But you know, the sun is out and you feel like you want to buckle down and study for the LSAT. Does that sound like you? What's up, Henry? What'd you say?
And sit inside. You know,
sit inside.
Sun's out. Sit inside.
Maybe
the LSAT.
Maybe you take the Seven Sage mobile site with you on the go and you sit outside and you do some questions on your phone.
Don't do that.
At the beach.
No, that's fake studying. I'm an anti like, oh, if you're doing a real study session, you do it. Do you guys study outside? Like, really?
No, I'm just kidding.
Really
I don't.
outside?
I know it's aesthetic to go to a coffee shop and like set up shop and like you have your matcha latte next to you and stuff, but it's just too difficult. Like there's music playing, there's people around. Like I could never get anything done like that. So no, all games aside, I do study at home in my cave, never to be seen by sunlight in those few hours.
What about you? Did you study outside, Zishan?
No, I like for school or for LSAT, neither actually. I did, I think maybe outside I could read a book, but I feel like if I was reading a book for a class, I would need to be locked in taking notes and stuff. And the big thing is I need a desk, right? I need a surface. I can't, me hunched over on the grass, like, I don't know. That's not, my back is not feeling good. I don't know.
You got like the posture of a prawn, like you're a shrimp bent over.
Yeah, I'm shrimped out,
It's too much.
I want to be
too much
upright.
glare on the screen when you're spark noting, right? Outside, right?
True.
Like, I guess it's chat GBTing now.
Right.
Nowadays.
Yeah, is Spark Notes irrelevant now with ChatGPT?
I say Spark Notes all the time in my live classes, and sometimes I'm like, do people know what this is anymore? Like, do people still use Spark Notes? Who knows?
And like you, millennial, Gen Z, who are you teaching now, Gen Alpha?
Segue, let this podcast be your Spark Notes version of this episode, be your Spark Notes version of how you study for the LSAT. Basically, your ChatGPT generated overview of steps 1 through whatever, of how to get yourself from wherever you are now, whether it's at the very, very beginning of studying, like you just signed up for Seven Sage and you're looking at this website, you're like, what do I do first? There's like a million different pages. Where do I start? Or you've already been studying for a while, you're gearing up for, or the day we're filming this, it's June. So you're gearing up for a up and coming exam, right? Basically, we're just here to give you an overview of how to get you to your goals.
Yeah.
So what should we start with? Should we start with the people that are on square one?
Why not?
I guess so. Yeah, good place to start, as ever. So, Zishan, where do we start? Let's say we're on day 1. I'm like picking a volunteer.
Yeah.
Where do we start? We're on day 1. What are some of the first steps we do? If this podcast episode is the first thing you're doing on Seven Sage, what can we offer?
Step 2, I think get in your cave.
Even if you're not step 1,
go inside.
Go inside. Carve. Well, I think actually that's a great place to start. Schedule. Like, can you carve out an hour of your day to study, or 2 or 3, depending on, do you have a full-time job? Do you have some time off? Do you have other responsibilities? And do you want to be being social and going on trips and whatnot? The worst thing you can do is not plan it, because then what's going to happen is you're going to be wrapped up in other summer activities, feeling guilty about not studying. But if you've scheduled the studying into your schedule, and then said, okay, well, these 3 days I'm going on this trip, and so I'm not studying or whatever, you won't feel guilty when you're having fun. So can you right now pull out your calendar and schedule your study sessions? It doesn't matter how many you do, but at least can you put them in and block off those times for studying? That is step 1. Can I find the time to fit it in? Maybe that's where I would start. Can I pass it to Henry?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, honestly, where, and especially pick a time. Like, don't just pick a day that you're going to study. I mean, maybe you should be studying a little bit every day, but really pick a time for you to study. Because if you just say, I'm going to study on Thursday, it's really easy to, let that slide. I do that all the time,
Right.
where I'll do that today, and then I don't do it. And so if you have a specific time frame, I think that's good. And especially by time frame, that also means maybe pick an endpoint too. Don't just say that you'll study for X, however long, right? I'll just study at this point in time. I think it's helpful to stop yourself too from doing like a 3-hour session, or even if you say I'm only going to study for an hour, it means that you can devote 100% attention to that hour or for that hour and a half. But after that, you need to know what you're going to study. And depending on what type of service you're using, or if you're using a service, I would recommend going through any curriculum. I think no one's too good for the curriculum. Maybe there's a couple people that are too good for the curriculum. It's not you who's listening though. It's true. It's true, right? You should go through a curriculum, even if it feels a little bit redundant. You can skip over it, maybe if it feels a little bit redundant or a little bit slower. But it's really helpful to go through a curriculum because, at 7Sage, it's formulated to take you from square one to, all right, you have a chance at this test. And I'm sure other
Henry, question I get
too.
all the time: how long does the core curriculum take to complete?
I was about to say that too. You wonderful listener, you're probably thinking, "Oh snap! How long am I going to be in my cave doing this?" Yeah. What do we think? How long did it take you guys to do the curriculum, or what are our estimates?
It's a little bit weird. Oh, you tell. Go ahead, please.
Well, I was going to say the entirety of the core curriculum is about 100 hours. If you do 3 hours a day, you can get it done in a month-ish, maybe less, especially if you skip around like Henry is saying. Nobody needs to do every single lesson. I would say a few weeks should be sufficient. Again, but it depends on how fast does the stuff click for you. Do you need to rewatch videos? Do you need to reread stuff? We cannot tell you how long it'll take for stuff to click in your brain. You might have to review lessons and such. But the time estimate on the website is about 100 hours total. Again, I think that can be fit into your first month of studying. Henry, you're making a face. Maybe you don't. I don't like
know.
That.
I would say 100 hours is a lot.
Now, if you me longer than that, Zishan.
It took you longer than 100 hours?
No, not 100 hours, but I mean longer than like 2-3 weeks. It took me like 6-ish, maybe 7 weeks to get through all the curriculum. Okay. What about you though, Henry? Now I'm interested.
I don't know. I read the LSAT trainer first, and then I went through the curriculum. And so there was a lot of repetition of concept there. So I definitely think and I felt pretty comfortable with some of the concepts too. By the time I got to the curriculum, I really wasn't so concerned with like main conclusion questions, right? Where there's a lot of depth associated on 7Sage with like how to do a main conclusion question, et cetera, et cetera. Or like there's a grammar section too, where for me, grammar was not a huge problem. So I kind of looked at this and I was like, I don't really need to deal with this because like I had a pretty good sense of grammar. I had some good literacy, I guess you could say, just from whatever my schooling. So I think like if you hear 100 hours, you're like, that seems like a lot. I don't think it's a guarantee that you're going to be spending 100 hours. I think if you feel pretty comfortable, you'll be able to go more quickly through the curriculum than 100 hours for sure. I don't want to put a number on it, but I could imagine 50 hours too. But you should at the very least look at each section of the core curriculum and be like, all right, is this something that is new to me? Because I spent like a half an hour just thinking about not unless statements, which is probably longer than is in the core curriculum because like that just did not make sense to me. And I just like sat myself down and was like, I'm going to make sure that not unless makes sense to me before I move on and why it works a certain way. But then there's other things which I noticed that the suggested timeline was like 3 hours and I did it in like 40 minutes. Or I looked at it all and I was like, I don't know if I need to do like keep on hammering through this. So, but the only way to know that is to actually look at it and do it. Right. Yeah, so I think you could say if it takes you 100 hours, great. But also don't feel like you have to beat yourself over the head if it's just such a fun, like such a concept that you just feel so good on. So, I don't know. Does that make sense as a potential recommendation?
Yeah. I think another way that you can gauge kind of what your timeline is going to look like, maybe even not just the curriculum, but in general, is also taking a diagnostic, which we usually recommend you do at some point early on in your studying, whether it's day one or just like, a week in once you have some familiarity with the exam. I don't know. You guys might have a different opinion, but I feel like the diagnostic score informs you a bit how much grunt work you're going to have to be pulling in the curriculum too. Because if you're starting out your diagnostic like in the 160s, which I'd say is like pretty abnormal, like my diagnostic was not near the 160s at all, then maybe you're not going to have to pull that much weight in the curriculum because you already have a pretty strong understanding of like basic logic versus if your curriculum falls somewhere low, your diagnostic falls somewhere lower, then that means you probably are going to have to spend a little bit more time on the foundational things to make sure you're like keeping up to pace with everything. So I don't know. I feel like a balance between like how easily do things click with you, how much material do you need to read in order to like comprehend things versus where was your diagnostic at. Those things together can kind of tell you, okay, here's a rough kind of outline of how long I'm probably going to be doing this thing, whether it's 50 hours, 100 or more, etc.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Nicole. A lot of people are afraid to take that first diagnostic test. I would say get over that fear quickly because one, that score does not matter. Your ceiling is it doesn't determine your ceiling. It just is telling you where you start. And you're going to be taking diagnostic tests quite regularly. So maybe get in the habit of carving out the time to sit through that few hours. Because you're going to get used to that. You need to get used to that. You're going to do it on the real LSAT. So if you're afraid about the time commitment or you're afraid about seeing your score, whatever you're afraid of, now's a great time to conquer that fear. Just sit down for that diagnostic. Forget about the score. Just use it to diagnose your weak areas so that you can focus on those as you attack the core curriculum. And again, if you don't have 3 hours in your day to take a diagnostic, this might be a great time to reassess your schedule to see where you can fit a couple hours in or a 3-hour chunk in once a week, maybe less frequent when you're just starting out. But at some point, you'll be taking a diagnostic about once a week later down the road in your studying.
Yeah, I know I've tutored some people before, and on day one, I'm like, okay, so I'm going to assign you a diagnostic. So when we come back, I can look at your analytics. And they're like, I have to sit down for 3 hours this week to do something. I'm like, yeah, this test you're signing up for is like almost 3 hours long. Like at some point you are going to have to sit and do something for like 3 hours. They're like, oh, I thought I could study for like, 20 minutes every 3 or 4 days. I'm like, you better get yourself in the mindset that this is going to involve, some longer sets of sitting shrimp format at your desk, So be mentally prepared for that.
Yeah, if you take a diagnostic too, you might not think to study for 20 minutes every couple days because that diagnostic is probably going to tell you that you did terribly, which is fine. Why would you do
Everybody's
well?
diagnostic sucks. Yeah.
Yeah. It's rare you get a good diagnostic, and you want to appreciate the full depth of this test and how complex it may or may not be.
Absolutely.
So, I guess that's step 3, take the diagnostic.
Yeah, so we have step one, you could take the diagnostic, I guess, before the curriculum or somewhere along the way, but essentially, right, we've decided our timeline, diagnostic, and or we're walking through the curriculum. I feel like the most juicy part, the part that the listeners probably want the most advice on, is like, what do you do when you're done with the curriculum? Because now up until this point, everyone using a platform has went through some form of a curriculum. So what do you do to like keep yourself in check when you don't have like a step-by-step plan laid out in front of you? So what do we think?
Drilling. I always say drilling is the key to success here. What's great about 7 Sage is it'll let you know which problem types are, priorities for you. Which, by the way, I actually got this question. I don't know if anyone's using 7 Sage, but if someone's like, I keep getting questions that say priority wrong, and questions that say low priority right. I'm like, yes, that's because the reason why is because if you get them wrong, they become a priority. And if you get them right, they become a low priority, right? So it's not the other way around where it's like, oh, the high priority questions I get wrong, right? They're so difficult. It's like no, it's because you're getting them wrong that become high priority. So 7 Sage will tell you what types of questions that you want to be drilling. And then what's even nicer about it is like you can just create a drill where you just said, I want to drill this type of question. And you can drill questions in a row. That's how you're going to get better at this test, is by looking at questions of the same type repeatedly and looking for patterns between them. And starting to understand, like, when you're in this particular question type, what is the end goal? What makes a right answer? What makes maybe not a right answer? How are certain questions similar? So drilling, I would say, is what you
Could
should be
you
grinding.
explain for the person who's just starting out, what is a drill? How do you make a drill? Like, what should a drill consist of? How long should it take? How do you drill?
Yeah. So I mean, drilling. Well, so on 7-stage, it's very simple because you click drill and it'll build a drill for you. But what a drill is a sequence of questions that are usually of the same question type. And so adding 5 questions, and I mean, if I think five or so questions is a pretty reasonable drill length. You do 5 questions in a row of the same question type, whether it's timed or untimed, depending on what you want to do. If you're earlier on, you're probably going to be doing untimed or a longer period of time. I usually say like timed-ish, in that like don't worry too much about the time, but try to move through it, right? Don't just dilly
Mm-hmm.
dally. And then eventually you'll probably move to just time drills in timed sections. But I think the drilling is just really important because you want to look at questions back to back that are the same, or at least of the same flavor. So that's what a drill is just doing various questions in a row. I don't know, does that answer
Agreed.
your questions, Ishan? What
It
drilling is?
does. Yes. Yeah. I think, yeah, 5, 10, 15 questions, make a drill, same question type, similar difficulty. And then what you want to do is go for accuracy, maybe increase that difficulty slightly over time until you develop a mastery of a certain question type. And then go back to your analytics, find the next question type that you're bad at, and start drilling that every day. And rinse and repeat. So as you just keep, I think you're sort of, here's like I get asked about this, like, what's a sample schedule? It's like, well, maybe your weekdays, Monday through Thursday, you're doing an hour or 2 of drilling every night. And you're creating a drill set, 10 to 15 questions. Maybe you start with a low difficulty. You go for accuracy. You do thorough blind review, wrong answer journal. And then maybe every day or every week, you're slowly increasing that difficulty. And then on the weekends, you take a practice test, a diagnostic practice test to diagnose new weak areas. If you already know what to study, what you should be drilling, what the weak areas are, maybe hold off on that practice test. There's no need. Drill till you master some question types. Then when you're ready to give yourself another challenge, take another practice test, see if you've mastered that question type, see what new weak areas come up, and then drill those. So maybe Monday through Thursday, you're drilling. Maybe you take Friday off. Saturday, you take a practice test. Sunday, you review that practice test. Again, you can play with the days and times as much as you want, but drilling is the bread and butter. That's what's going to make you
baby,
better. Drill, baby, drill.
Indeed.
And then the practice test is not really a test. It's just to diagnose new weak areas. That's really how you should view them. So you could spend your whole summer drilling and PTing after you finish the core curriculum. And you will see improvement, especially if you do it right with the blind review and the wrong answer journal. The review is just as important as sitting down to answer the questions. Sorry, Nicole, I think you were going to say something.
No. I'm just nodding along that. Yeah, I totally agree. And, drills can be super diverse too. Like Zishan and Henry are talking about drills for like content, right? Like nailing a specific question or flavor of questions. But you can also be drilling for speed, like we talked about for time sections, or like challenging times, like doing a first 10 questions of an LSAT in 10 minutes. Or you could be drilling for confidence. Like if you don't have any one specific question you want to get better, but you want to improve you want to minimize the time you spend wavering on an answer choice and going back and forth, you could do confidence-based drilling. So drilling can cater towards a lot of different weaknesses all across the board. But we do have good tools to like design a drill that will help target those weaknesses, whatever they are. So guess we covered a good timeline, right? Taking diagnostics, planning a timeline, going through the curriculum, doing drills and practice tests. What about those students who are listening to this, presumably sometime in June, I guess, and planning for an August LSAT or, maybe September? So they have maybe a limited timeline and they want to crunch in as much as they can in those months. What are some ways we can make this more time crunchy, for lack of a better word? How can we make this more concise if someone is really in a rush? What are some last minute things to do?
Last minute thing. I mean, if you're in a rush and you don't want to plan out a lot, I mean, one of the things that I do and I just tell people to do if they don't want to have like a very involved like plan is again, you just like you do your PT, you miss a question type, seems important, you just drill that question type before the next PT. And then until you get that right, and then you do your next PT, and then you get another question type wrong, right? I got 2 strengthening questions wrong, regardless of whether or not you feel good or bad about strength. Then you just drill that question. I think that's a way to like crunch in the sense of maybe you're taking PT like once a week or maybe more than once a week. You can end up like you don't have to think too hard about that, right? Like that will be a good solution to your problem. But I don't know if you're really crunched in. I guess one thing is like sometimes if you have a busy schedule, even I know we were kind of dunking on 20 minutes, but even doing 20 minutes one day is better than 0. And so just doing a little bit every day, I think is nice. Obviously, you still want to have some days where you spend more time than 20 minutes, but you're like, oh, man, I can only study for like 20 minutes a day. Or maybe all I have in me is to study for 20 minutes. All right, then do the 20 minutes. Just be like, all right, that's it. That's what I would probably recommend for those of you who are grinding or crunch timing.
Yeah, it sounds like also, Henry, like the advice is like your timeline will not really alter how you study. You're still going to be drilling and assessing your weaknesses and, trying to master question types that you're bad at. You're going to be doing that week to week. And whether you do that for 2 months or 6 months or 9 months, I don't really think it changes the process in between. Now, I think one thing we say is either you're going to compromise on your timeline or your score. So if you're dead set on August, well, you might not get the score you want. But if you're dead set on a 175, then you might not get the timeline you want. It might take you 6 months rather than 2, or again, I think a year is probably plenty for most people. I don't want to scare anybody, but sometimes the summer and the August test is just not enough time, especially if you're trying to make a big jump in score. But day in, day out, you're going to be doing the same thing. So it's probably, pretty straightforward in terms of tracking your progress. How fast is this stuff clicking for me? How fast am I mastering each question type? And you'll see what's my average of the last 5 practice tests over the last few weeks. Are they hovering in the range that I want? If yes, then yeah, you'll be ready. But if they're not, then you might need a little more time. But again, the process won't change. You're not doing anything wrong. You just have to keep doing the same stuff, which can be frustrating. But anyway, all is to say, like, just know that August can happen, but it might not be your ideal score. Just because, sometimes this stuff takes a while.
Yeah, exactly. We can't really there's not really one of those steps of the process that can really be skimped on too much, right? You can't like skip drills or skip practice tests, or we mentioned like you can hop around the curriculum a bit, but you can't necessarily like skip the entire curriculum and just expect that you're going to see like a 20-30 point bump in your score either. So you do got to give attention to each of these steps, but there may be different ways to balance them. Cool. Do we give a good overview? We feel like we got all the steps pretty much till test day.
Yeah.
I think
cool.
We just got to tell folks, hey, have a great summer. Get the studying in if you can.
Hags, yeah.
Hags indeed.
Right?
Yeah.
And,
dress this skimpy, but don't drill skimpy.
Ooh.
Right. Maybe? I don't know. Is that okay?
I don't know.
I love that.
Henry. This is a clean podcast. This is for families. This is for kids.
I liked that though. We'll be getting a neon sign of that behind me when I'm teaching live class.
Yeah,
I do like it. But yeah, this is a great time. This is a great time to lock in. Whether you're just starting out or this is, you were studying before, maybe you took a little break and you really want to lock in. This is the time to do it. Summer is a great time. And you can make some huge LSAT gains this summer. So just stick to the process. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if anybody has any questions, if you feel like we left some stones unturned, is that the phrase? I keep trying to throw in phrases that I don't know. If you feel like we left anything that you want some more clarification or more specific questions about, you can always drop them in the comments. And if we answer one of your questions, you may get a really fun prize. So like, comment, subscribe, the stuff the influencers say. Drop us things you want to see in future podcast episodes. And otherwise, we'll catch you in the next one. Thank you all. And Hags.
Peace. Hags. Take care.
Good stuff.